Okay, Jaafar, it's 4 or 5. What do you think we should start?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. So, hello everybody, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to open this New Year session of our online series of lecture dedicated to Mesopotamia. And today, for our first lecture, I have the honor to welcome 2 speakers. First, Alexei JANKOWSKI-DIAKONOFF from the Institute of Oriental Studies of the Russian Academy of Science and also co-director of the Iraqi-Russian Multidisciplinary Project related to the excavations on Tel Majif and Tel Dehaila in southern Iraq. And Jaafar Jotheri, who is also co-organizer of this session of lectures from Al-Qadisiyah University. Their lecture, which is the first of a series of 8 lectures to come within the next weeks, is entitled Tel Dehaila, History of a Large Southern Mesopotamian City as Told by its Geomorphology. So Jaafar, the floor is yours for the conference. Thank you very much. Thank you all and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for this great introduction. I actually will talk in Arabic for our Arabic audience, and then of course hold the rest of the talk. Actually, Alexei will do that. So السلام عليكم. هذه محاضرة من سلسلة محاضرات تقيمها منظمة آثار غرب آسيا. هناك بصراحة عدة محاضرات ستلقى في هذه السلسلة. محاضرة هذا اليوم تخص جيومورفولوجية تل دحيلة. الفريق الروسي العراقي بصراحة أجرى عدة مواسم في هذا الموقع، وكانت هناك نتائج مبهرة بصراحة. من أهم هذه النتائج أو نتائج النتائج التي سيتم عرضها هذا اليوم هي تخص جيومورفولوجية تل الدحيلة. يقع تل الدحيلة بصراحة بين على نهر الفرات القديم، نفس نهر أور وأريدو، وهو تل جدا كبير وفيه معالم جيومورفولوجية جدا بصراحة كثيرة. تم رسم الأنهار القديمة وقنوات الري القديمة، وكذلك تم رسم المظاهر الجيومورفولوجية الأخرى. من خلال هذه الدراسة بصراحة تم الوصول إلى عدة استنتاجات، منها الحقول الزراعية القديمة وموقع تل الدحيلة نسبة للنهر القديم، وكم مرة تم استيطان تل الدحيلة، كذلك سعة الموقع وحجم الموقع ماذا تعني. كل هذه التفاصيل سيتكلم بها الدكتور ألكسي. So yeah, I had the honor actually to be part of Alexei team representing the Iraqi scholars, and of course we have other Iraqis actually from the SBAH worked with Alexei and his excellent team. So Alexei actually will talk, as Barbara mentioned, we'll talk about the geomorphology of Tel Dehaila. So please, Alexei.
Thank you very much, dear Jaafar, dear Barbara, for this exciting possibility to present the results of our research to the international audience. And I am very excited and even terrified to see in the audience some people that greatly helped us at the very beginning. I must try to thank many people who made our research possible, but it is never, I never succeed in naming them all, but let me try. Let me try, if I can move on with my presentation. Yes. Here. Yes. First of all, Of course, our very, very special thanks go to the SBH, to its former and present leaders, to Abdullah Al-Hamdani, to the present-day chairman of the SBH, Laith Hussein, to Ali Obeid Shaligam, to Riyad Hatem Mohammed, to the SBH inspectors and vicar at different times, Amjad Niama, Tahir Queen, Amir Abdul Razak, to Haider Schneer and the coordinator of international teams at Ur Ali Kadim, to our good friends Mustafa Al-Husseini and Muftadar Al-Oda, to our colleagues Mustafa Fadl, Farkad Bakr, Akram and Hani Mohsen, to the commanders and servicemen of the archaeological police, and to many, many Iraqi friends and colleagues, among whom in the first place, of course, are Amir Dosh and Jassim Al-Assadi. To Mikhail Bogdanov, Maxim Maximov, academician Vitaly Naumkin, academician Nikolai Makarov, Irina Popova, Alikber Alikberov for institutional support, to Sergei Prudov, Vladimir Smirnov, Yuri Levin, Sergei Karavayev, Marina Bondareva, and Gleb Larionov for funding and support in kind, and to my team members, to Vasily Novikov for aerial shots, to Daniel Kaldelbank, and Lika Gusak for pottery, to Shahmardan Amirov and Maxim Menshikov for general archaeology, and to Jaafar Jotheri for geomorphology. Let me start with some basics. I beg pardon for these who knows it better than me. As we all know, the lower part of the alluvium was, and to some extent still is, occupied by the Mesopotamian marshes, and together with the agricultural lands intermixed with them, these marshes were the primary habitat of the first Mesopotamian civilization. The question is, how far upstream did the marshes extend? This question, in turn, is related to the question of the Arabian Persian Gulf shoreline. This second issue is complicated because, in fact, there are two deltas of the Tigris and the Euphrates, the inner and the outer one. The outer delta is delimited in a way by the so-called Zubair sill, a sheet intrusion, a little downstream Basra here. The inner delta, in its turn, is constrained by the two alluvial fans, the southern, the Pleistocene or perhaps Pliocene Wadi Batin, and the present day currently functioning alluvial fans of Karun and Kerhe. The northern part of the alluvium, as you see here on this digital elevation model, has a very visible gradient, while the southern, the gradient, that's to say, coming from higher parts to the lower parts, letting the river flow easily. And the lower part of the alluvium does not have such a well visible gradient, and the gradient is low, and there is even a slight lateral tilt, which favors the lateral flow of the two rivers. That is to say, creating lakes and marshes. This is the marshland, the part of the inner delta with low gradient and facilitated lateral flow. Now let us return to the question of the shoreline. We know that about 6,000 years before present, there was a marine transgression related to the general sea level rise. I suggest to call it the Ubaid transgression because it roughly corresponds at its peak with the Ubaid zero dates at Tel Wayli. During the next 2,000 years, the sea was receding. And now there are two views on the upstream limit of the transgression. The one held by, supported by Jaafar Jotheri, among others, puts the transgression limit between modern Amara and Nasiriyah. And the other, supported among others by H.Wright and Abdullah Al-Hamdani, prefer a more northern line between Samawa and Amara. There is indeed a feature which resembles this, corresponding to this northern limit, somewhere between and Uruk. Still, the geomorphological data speaks in favor of the more southern limit, the one roughly on the line Ur-Lagash. Anyway, we mustn't see it as a continued shoreline, wherever it be, but rather simply the upstream limit of the propagation of freshened seawater within a very complex system of lagoons, freshwater bodies, marshes, and tidal plains. In the second millennium before Christian era, which is our period of interest, the seawater limit should have receded much downstream, but the complexity of the inner delta should have remained. Another basic point in this region are the elevated riverbeds and the levees. Since the Tigris and the Euphrates are carrying a lot of solid particles, their deposition, especially during floods, makes the riverbed and its borders, the levees, more elevated than the surrounding floodplain. This allows the very existence of the famous Mesopotamian irrigational agriculture, which depends mostly on the gravitational irrigation. People dig canals through the levees. The water flows down to irrigate their fields and orchards. The riverbeds, with their levees, are well visible on this stretched SRTM digital elevation model. Here you see the modern Euphrates flowing north to Ur and across the Hamma marshes. The levee system being fairly elevated, but in the same way, we can also see the ancient levees of the previous branches of the Euphrates. The southern area, the so-called Eridu plain, nowadays called Sulaybiyah, is somewhat separated from the main alluvium by the northwestern spur of a very ancient feature, the Pleistocene or Pliocene Wadi Batin. The city of Eridu was cited in the later cuneiform sources as the birthplace of the Sumerian statehood. The texts in question are much later than the Ubaid marine transgression, but it can be asked whether the Wadi Batin did at some point offer any shelter from tidal events coming from the northeast, and therefore helped create a somewhat special situation at Eridu. The fibrous texture, for example here, of very small waterways betrays the presence of a modern or ancient marsh. To have a marsh, there are two conditions. The water must overflow an obstacle, a levee, or breach it. And secondly, there must be a barrier to prevent the water from flowing further. Here you see many possible barriers. The Arabian plateau to the southwest, the Wadi Batin, but also the levees of different waterways of different periods. Of course, artificial dikes can also serve as a marsh-creating barrier. The marshes can also include extensive freshwater lakes. Robert Adams suggested that the Sumerian word for sea, Abba, used to designate this area as a sealand, Qur'ab, could have meant not only the open sea, the Arabian Bahr, but also what the local people call Hor, these large bodies of fresh water. The sealand, Mat Tamti and Akkadian, would be then the land of the Hor, of the Ahwar, of the marshes in our modern terminology, neighboring the true sea and controlling the way to it, but hydrographically not exactly the sea in the modern sense. Marshes are a good thing. They offer a lot of resources. Reeds are used to make about everything, from large public buildings to small private dwellings and shelters for cattle, also for making furniture, ropes, small boats, ocean ships, and many other things. Marshes are also a source of food, from seasonal pastures and lots of fish and waterfowl. Marshes are perhaps not very good for centralized power, which needs agriculture, but they are very good for local resilience. The present day aerial picture of the small marsh city of Chibash is a good illustration of how a settlement, modern or ancient, could be not only on the river, but actually in the river. Let us have one more look at the Eridu plain with a reconstruction of the ancient waterways by Jaafar Jotheri. The reconstruction and in general our knowledge of the history of the Eridu plain is based on a thorough survey made by Henry Wright in 1965. It was Henry Wright who first registered the ancient urban settlement now under our study, giving it the number 34 in his catalogue. It is the largest settlement on the Eridu plain, and it is situated on a branch of the Euphrates, here highlighted artificially, just to bring your attention to it. The results of the 1965 survey were published in 1981 in the same volume with the surveys of the main alluvial plain by Robert Adams. Henry Wright dated his Tel 34 as late Lars, according to the surface pottery, that is to say, Old Babylonian in the broad sense in our present-day terminology. In 1986, Elizabeth Stone, on the grounds of then recently published Wright survey, chose Tel 34 for her planned study of the Old Babylonian society. She needed a large undisturbed single-period Old Babylonian site, and Tel 34 fit very well for this. But at the time of the attempted reconnaissance, the site was surrounded by water. Elizabeth Stone and her team turned to another site near Nippo, which later was identified as ancient Mashkan-Shapir. It was thoroughly surveyed and then excavated during one season in 1990. The following war stopped the team from further work, and the subsequent looting destroyed much of the site. Still, the research at Mashkan-Shapir brought very valuable information of what can be considered, in a way, a sister city of Tel 34. A disciple of Danny George, Abdulramir Al-Hamdani, was appointed inspector of the SBH of the Car in 2002, and upon him fell the toughest task to protect the very rich archaeological heritage of the most of Sumer during the most intensive lootings of 2003 and the following years. While doing everything possible to combat looting, Abdulramir Hamdani also used his visits to the field for survey, including the Eridu plain. He understood the importance of Tel 34 in the area locally known as Noawiz, and gave to the large Tel the name of Dehaila, which in Henry Wright's catalogue belongs to another site further downstream. As Amir Hamdani told us, this was done to mislead the looters. This word Dehaila, meaning a little well or a cistern, according to Hans-Wehr dictionary, is a rather frequent place name in the Arabic countries. Abdul-Amir al-Hamdani became a disciple of Elizabeth Stone at Stony Brook University, and in 2015 defended his thesis based on his first-hand knowledge of the marshland ethnography and on his surveys of 2003-2008. Some sites of his survey are also on Henry Wright's catalogue, as Tel Dehaila, Tel 34 itself, but others don't overlap and are in addition to Henry Wright's. Abdul-Amir al-Hamdani proposes to see an extensive marsh in the Eridu area around the crisis of the late 18th century, around and after the destruction of southern cities by Samsu-Iluna and the postulated deurbanization of the South Alluvial Plain. He proposes to see the urban settlement of Tel Dehaila as an alternative Ur, a city where the population of Ur moved after its destruction by Samsu-Iluna in 1740, before Christian era. And he puts forward the idea it was the capital of the Sealand dynasty, having the size and the position of Tel Dehaila as his main arguments. When we compare Abdul-Amir Hamdani's survey map to the SRT-MDEM, we see that some of the area around the Eridu River is indeed depressed, here and here. But the immediate surroundings of Tel Dehaila are not. These lobes can still be the results of sediment deposition in the marshes being a good place for this. This photo was taken on April 10, 2019, when Elizabeth Stone came to Baghdad after her last excavation season at Ur as director of the American excavation team. It would be completely out of the scope of the present lecture to speak about the deep friendship between these two people and about everything Elizabeth Stone did to help her former PhD student to combat his illness. But I must stress that the role of both Elizabeth Stone and Abdul-Amir al-Hamdani in making possible the research and our research at Tel Dehaila is essential. On the same day, April 10, 2019, we came to Dehaila with Shahmardan Amirov and Vasily Novikov to make our first aerial shots of the site. Here we see all the features that we have to discuss further in this lecture. The initial straight channel of the Eridu River, its later meander scar, the crevasse splay breaking the original levee and bringing water into what is going to be a marsh, a connection of a later canal, and a still later hydrographic feature. We remember that the riverbed is higher than the floodplain. So if you want to build something in the plain, the best is to use an older riverbed. Here. To avoid your settlement being flooded. Perhaps building the initial settlement influenced the meander. Anyway, the city has two distinct parts. The rather poorly drained main part and a well-drained shelf, which follows the meandering pattern. We suggested, therefore, that there were three consecutive phases: straight flow, so-called Eridu 1, the start of meandering, and the later phase of meandering. Old canals meander like rivers. The name of this waterway in the cuneiform sources, it is identifiable. The river of the Eridu plain cannot be distinguished by its name only between a canal and the river. Both have the same determinative in cuneiform. But given great length of the Eridu waterway, it is more likely that this was a natural branch of the Euphrates, perhaps straightened in some places, but still natural, not a canal all the way long. There is a baked brick wall leading towards the river, corresponding to the line of a northern city canal. We choose the eastern extremity of this wall to be the zero height fixed point for the site. And in 2020 and 2021, we made 3 soundings at Dehaila. The first is situated on the well-drained shelf, possibly a later phase of the river meandering. The second on an inner wall of what we are thinking to be the temenos, the sacred area. And the third in a recent looter's pit. In 2000, in addition, well, I don't know why I put it here. The dating of Dehaila by its surface pottery by H.Wright was late Larsa Old Babylonian. And indeed, what we saw on the tell confirms this, and we have typical Old Babylonian forms. We also have these stable food caps pertaining to the Old Babylonian period, and the bitumen paint, but also a technique to combat the cracking of the bases, which consisted of making a hole and putting a coarse paste into it. Also preferable during the Old Babylonian period. Later, Kassite practice was different from this. But after the first soundings, we found also some different forms which can point to somehow later occupation of our site, and which can resemble early Sealand or Qalat al-Bahrain forms. The carinated bowl, of which there are typical examples on Tel Khaybar, proven Sealand site with a good cuneiform date, and peripheral probable analogues from the peripheral pottery of the 18th, 17th centuries before Christian era from Qalat al-Bahrain, Dilmun. The sounding 1 shows a low mud brick wall parallel to the river with Old Babylonian or perhaps early Sealand, as I told you, pottery associated with it. What is interesting about this wall is the soil on which it is built. While the light sandy loam number 13 can be Aeolian, the heavier sandy loam 12 comes from the river. According to Jaafar Jotheri, it was brought from the river to raise the construction level above seasonal flooding. Then there is a tiny habitation level, and once again, sent from the river. Whether the latter is also artificial ballast or a sign of a flooding event, we don't know yet. The sounding 2 shows a monumental system of parallel walls, of which the main wall is almost 4 meters large and has a 1 meter socle recovered with backfill. The pottery is the same, Old Babylonian or perhaps early Sealand, nothing earlier and nothing later. A truly single period Old Babylonian situation as Elizabeth Stone had hoped. On the top, there are 2 tanurs, bread ovens, of clearly much later, without any architectural remains associated with them. There are a couple of corroded iron objects with them, probably arrowheads, and a Neo-Babylonian vessel. We think that these upper tanur layers, as we call them, are a testimony of a semi-nomadic camp of a time after the cessation of urban life at Tel Dehaila. Here again, the virgin soil is of a special interest. The monumental wall was built upon a very special type of clays, which are typical for a crevasse plain. That is to say, a breach in the original levee filled by the sediments of a flooding river. A crevasse plays next to the levee itself in terms of initial usefulness for initial construction, because once again it is higher than the surrounding flat plain. Therefore, there are good chances we are now at the point of the initial construction of the settlement. We can't give a date earlier than Old Babylonian or Larsa. It leaves open the possibility of Abdul-Amir Hamdani's idea of Tel Dehaila being the alternative Ur, created around the year 12 of Samsuiluna. While this possibility remains open, it seems as likely that it was one of the many settlements created during the classical Old Babylonian or Larsa times, which were, as we know from H.Wright, the peak of settlement density in the region. The sounding 3 is not very informative, but it is here that we found some stratified sherds with bitumen painting. The aspect of the structure and pottery is normal Old Babylonian. Now let us have a look at Dehaila's surroundings. Our Iraqi colleague Mustafa Fadl was the first to bring our attention to a hydrographic feature to the south of the city, with a strange geometrical shape. An ancient feature would have blurred or sinuous shores due to meandering. Straight means recent. Still, it can't be too recent. It is quite flat, filled with Aeolian sediments, and also we know that the main occupation of the Eridu plain ceased in the mid-first millennium, when the southern branches of the Euphrates stopped flowing. By the way, this is the reason for not finding any Sasanian or later pottery at Dehaila. The nearest Sasanian fort is about 20 kilometers to the north, on the other side of Tel Dehaila. Also, this feature cuts into the main settlement. So even for this reason, it can't be Old Babylonian. We suggested with Jaafar Jotheri that this is a defensive trench, or the same idea as Khandak Shapur, but much smaller and much earlier, and that it was created to protect some agricultural assets, probably orchards, south to the ancient Tel, which wasn't a living city anymore. The protection would be intended against the nomads coming from the Arabian plateau, which is very close. We visited the presumed trench and saw that the ground was accumulated on the inner side of it, on the river side, like one would have done when making a fortification against people coming from the west, indeed. It is even better visible on this elevation model. The inner side is higher. There are also possible remains of an inner irrigation canal, in case if the trench served also some irrigation purposes. There is a certain cassite potential in the surface scatter of the main settlement, but absolutely no typical cassite forms. On the contrary, at least in the southern part of the main tell Dehaila, there are good Neo-Babylonian sherds. One was found, as you remember, in the context of the semi-nomadic camp in the central part of the city. This is why we suggest that the defensive trench, the protected assets, and the much looted graveyard in the southern part of Dehaila should be Neo-Babylonian. During our survey of the trench, we found a previously unrecorded small site to which we gave a temporary name of Noon 5. We did so because other tells in the vicinity in Abdulhamir Hamdani's survey bear the name of Noon. Perhaps our Noon 5 is simply one of Abdulhamir Hamdani's sites, but misplaced on his maps. I hope that you see the image well, because I have some artifacts on the screen. Please tell me if there is a problem. What is strange about this small site is its eastern limit. It is cut straight by the elevated riverbed of the first phase of the Eridu River, the initial phase. We know that this is normal for the riverbed to be elevated, but why did the site stop at it? It is very difficult to imagine that this small settlement was so old that it was cut by the channel. The only diagnostic sherds we found during our brief visit was cassite, looked like cassite. It is indeed a good place for a small cassite settlement, which typically were built next to the previously abandoned old Babylonian places. Our only guess so far is that for some reasons water continued to stand or to accumulate in the old river channel. It looks dark, wet, and poorly drained. This brackish water would prevent the inhabitants of this possibly cassite village to go further eastward with their constructions. Now let us look at northwest, where we have another feature, something connecting to the city. There was a practice in Mesopotamia to build rescue canals when the main river of the settlement became silted. And here we have an example of this. The people had to build a canal from another branch of the Euphrates, the western branch in relation to the Eridu River, all the way to Dehaila. And here is the point of connection of the junction of this canal to the city canal system. We know from other excavations and surveys that it was quite normal for a southern Mesopotamian city to have a system of inner canals. Here, for example, are the canals from Mashkan Shapir. Perhaps even we have here a small harbor. Here is an example of modern day inner canal in Chibais. A question can be asked if the Hamor Canal was used also to feed the defensive trench. And the answer appears to be yes, because there is a visible connection between them. Then we have to ask, of course, about the date. If we postulate that the defensive trench was Neo-Babylonian, and the city did not exist anymore during that time, then why to build a canal to the city in the Neo-Babylonian times? Our answer is that the canal was built during the main urban phase of the city's existence, that is to say, in Old Babylonian or Sealand time, but later reused to feed the defensive trench. So let us recapitulate. We have here the initial phase of the Eridu River, straight, flowing from north to south. At some point, there was a settlement founded on it. Perhaps it influenced the river meandering. Perhaps it was founded after the river started to meander. At some point, there was a breach in the levee and a crevasse splay. So it created the elevation necessary for the initial construction. I should have talked about this before, of course. First, the crevasse splay, then the city initial construction, the foundation. Then the meandering. Now we see clearly that the crevasse splay goes under the later meander stars. So this is the right order this time. And at some point, the flow of the main river, the Eridu River, was not enough to feed the city, and a rescue canal was built from a little bit upstream from Tel Hamor, which is a multi-period, rather small site. And still later, when the urban life had already ceased at Tel Dehaila, probably in Neo-Babylonian times, a defensive trench was built to protect agricultural assets, and the canal, the Hamor Canal, was reused to bring water to it. And after the Neo-Babylonian times, somewhere in the mid-first millennium, the southern branches of the Euphrates didn't carry any more water, and the life in this region came to an end. But the book of Iraqi geomorphology, written in the meander scars and other features visible on the satellite and aerial shots and digital models, is open for us to read. And we're very happy to be able to read it and to tell you about this. And thank you for your attention.